If you ooga dooga your lug nuts a little bit too hard, or have a rust bucket, or you're just as strong as the Hulk like me, you might break a wheel stud or a lug stud on your Toyota T100. Fixing it might be a little bit more involved than you would expect. If you've replaced a lug stud on other vehicles, you might have thought it was an easy job. Well, on the T100 and the other torsion bar Toyotas, there's a large number of steps required to get to the wheel studs. Today we're going to go over everything needed to replace a wheel stud. The obvious stuff. Be good to have a manual. We have the Haynes here. We're going to use that. We need to be able to lift and support the truck so we can take the wheel off. We need a jack stand, and then obviously some way to take the wheel off. We need a jack stand. Our tire kit, including the lug wrench here. Once we get the wheel off, we've got to remove the brake caliper. So we need to open the fluid reservoir and then depress the brake pads to give us some room to maneuver. To depress the brake pads, a pair of pliers or some sort of clamp or vice grips would be good for depressing the brake pads so you can get the caliper off. To actually take the caliper off, we have to remove two bolts. They're both 17 millimeter. So we're going to need a socket, and those are on there pretty good. So in addition to our ratcheting wrench, we're going to also need a breaker bar to get those loose. Those caliper bolts are torqued to 90 foot-pounds. So if you haven't taken off your caliper bolts in a while, you're going to want some PB Blaster or something like it to help break those loose. Once we get the brake caliper off, we're going to need to support it so it doesn't put unnecessary pressure on the brake line. So bungee cord could help with that as well. Now we could remove the full-time hubs, or if you have manual hubs, the manual hubs. For us, that requires us to remove the dust cap, screwdriver, and a hammer helps. Next, we can remove the hub cover mounting bolts and the bolt from the end of the drive axle. Those both call for 12 millimeter. You're going to want your 12 millimeter socket or wrench and your screwdriver again to hold the wheel hub still. Once we have those off, we can remove the cone washers, which the manual calls for a brass hammer. I don't have a brass hammer. It looked like somebody used a regular hammer already, so I just used the claw hammer to get those loose. Another thing you could do is leave the nuts on the end of those bolts so that when you do break free those cone washers, they don't go flying like they did for me. Next, we get to use our screwdriver and hammer again to bend back the tabs on the lock washer sitting between the outer lock nut and the inner lock nut so that we can then remove the outer lock nut first. This is where we're going to need our first specialized tool. Technically, you could probably use something like these guys to remove that, but in terms of replacing it, you're going to want to be able to torque it to spec. Now we need a 54 millimeter hub socket or independent front suspension axle socket, whatever you want to call it. I think this is from Northwest Toyota or Northwest Yoda. I got on Yoda Shop, and it works with your ratchet or breaker bar. So use this to pull out the outer lock nut. Then we can remove that locking washer and then use this once again to remove the inner lock nut.
Look at that.
Look at that. Once we have those out, there is now a thrust washer and the wheel bearing itself inside the hub. So the book says to pull out the hub slightly to disengage the wheel bearing, and then try not to drop it on the floor like I did. Oh shit. Oh shit. Oh shit. We're gonna need to clean those up, obviously. So now we have the hub off, but we still can't get to our lug stud because the rotor is in the way. So now you're probably going to need either a vise or an impact. I used an impact with a 14, I believe those are 14 millimeter bolts. Just a lot easier. The impact pulls those bolts right off compared to getting a vise and having to pull all 6 of those off by hand. Once you get the bolts holding the rotor to the hub off, might still be stuck on there. So that's where I got to pull out my trusty dead blow hammer to give it some convincing. It actually took a decent amount of effort to get the rotor off the hub, but we got there eventually. And then we could actually just pound the lug stud out. I tried using this first to give it a good whack. It seemed like this was too soft for the lug stud, so I ended up hitting it with the claw hammer, and that actually worked perfectly, I think, on the second hit. Now we can finally replace our lug stud. I use these from Yoda Shop, part number 90942-02082. They look exactly like the one that was in the truck before. I believe they're Toyota. We're nearing the halfway mark, probably. And I used a combination of washers, a wrench, miscellaneous things to put in between the lug nut and the hub itself so I could tighten that lug nut down and pull the lug stud up into the hub. Once I was satisfied with that, we could put the whole thing back together. So now we gotta put the hub back on the spindle, which brings us to another supply we need. Grease. This whole time, you've probably noticed there's a bunch of grease on everything. So we're going to need to replace that with some new high-temp wheel bearing grease. Additionally, this entire time, you've probably been getting grease on everything. So we should have started off with a roll of paper towels and a bunch of gloves so that you can clean that grease off and get the new grease applied. Related to the grease getting on everything, brake clean. We're going to need brake clean to make sure that our rotor is nice and clean. We do not want wheel bearing grease all over our brake rotor. It's not going to work. We can put the hub back on, put the wheel bearing in, and the thrust washer into the little slot on the spindle that sticks out. Make sure to add more wheel bearing grease after removing the old stuff. That's much better. Once we install the thrust washer, we can then install the inner lock nut on the spindle. We need to tighten the inner lock nut to 43 foot-pounds while rotating the hub to seat the bearings. Okay. Then we back off the interlock nut until it can be loosened by hand. Then we tighten the interlock nut again to 18 foot-pounds while rotating the hub assembly. Verify that the hub assembly rotates smoothly and no end play is present. To do that, we need a torque wrench. Once we've got that torque down, we can install the lock washer and tighten the outer lock nut to 35 pounds. Check the bearing preload, and then you can bend one washer tab towards the inner lock nut and one towards the outer lock nut, like it was when we took it off. Now we can put our full-time hub back on. So essentially the reverse of before. Put on your hub with some grease, your cone washers, and then your nuts. And make sure those get tightened down through 10 mil. Tighten down your axle nut as well, also 12 mil. Okay, now we get to put the brake caliper back on. So those are those two 17 millimeter bolts. We've got to get lined up. It's kind of a pain in the ass to get those lined up. You can't really see very well. And the brake caliper is kind of heavy. So it might take you a little bit longer than expected to do that. Those get torqued to 90 pounds. So you're definitely going to want your torque wrench once again for this. Once you get those back on, can't forget. We also, this whole time, we should be using brake clean. Make sure we don't have a bunch of grease all over our rotor, but now would be pretty much our last chance to do that. So the next step is put the wheel back on. So we put our wheel back on, lug nuts. Those get torqued to 83 foot-pounds. So we're going to lower the truck and then torque those down to 83. And now we've done it. That's it. Can you believe it? That is all you need to do to replace the lug stud on your Toyota T100. And this is it that you need to do it. Please like and subscribe if you enjoyed the video. Thanks for watching.